This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Warlords of Mars, written by Edgar Rice Burroughs and read by J.D. Weber on the south shores of Lake Superior. Chapter 1. On the River Iss. In the shadows of the forest that flanks the crimson plain by the side of the lost sea of Chorus and the Valley d'Or, beneath the hurtling moons of Mars, speeding their meteoric way close above the bosom of the dying planet, I crept stealthily along the trail of a shadowy form that hugged the darker places with a persistency that proclaimed the sinister nature of its errand. For 6 long Martian months I had haunted the vicinity of the hateful Temple of the Sun, within whose slow revolving shaft, far beneath the surface of Mars, my princess lay entombed, but whether alive or dead I knew not. Had Feodor's slim blade found that beloved heart? Time only would reveal the truth. 687 Martian days must come and go before the cell's door would again come opposite the tunnel's end where last I had seen my ever-beautiful geology. Half of them had passed, or would on the morrow, yet vivid in my memory, obliterating every event that had come before or after. There remained the last scene before the gust of smoke blinded my eyes, and the narrow slit that had given me sight of the interior of her cell closed between me and the Princess of Helium for a long Martian year. As if it were yesterday, I still saw the beautiful face of Feodor, daughter of Mata Shang, distorted with jealous rage and hatred as she sprang forward with raised dagger upon the woman I loved. I saw the red girl, Thuvia of Parth, leap forward to prevent the hideous deed. The smoke from the burning temple had come then to blot out the tragedy, but in my ears rang the single shriek as the knife fell. Then silence, and when the smoke had cleared, the revolving temple had shut off all sight or sound from the chamber in which the 3 beautiful women were imprisoned. Much there had been to occupy my attention since that terrible moment, but never for an instant had the memory of the thing faded, and all the time that I could spare from the numerous duties that had devolved upon me in the reconstruction of the government of the firstborn since our victorious fleet and land forces had overwhelmed them, had been spent close to the grim shaft that held the mother of my boy, Carthoris of Helium. The race of blacks that for ages had worshipped Isis, the false deity of Mars, had been left in a state of chaos by my revealment of her as not more than a wicked old woman. In their rage they had torn her to pieces. From the high pinnacle of their egotism the firstborn had been plunged to the depths of humiliation. Their deity was gone, and with her the whole false fabric of their religion. Their vaunted navy had fallen in defeat before the superior ships and fighting men of the red men of Helium. Fierce green warriors from the orchard sea bottoms of outer Mars had ridden their wild thoats across the sacred gardens of the temple of Isis, and Tars Tarkas, Jeddak of Thark, fiercest of them all, had sat upon the throne of Isis and ruled the firstborn, while the allies were deciding the conquered nation's fate. Almost unanimous was the request that I ascend the ancient throne of the black men. Even the firstborn themselves concurred in it, but I would have none of it. My heart could never be with the race that had heaped indignities upon my princess and my son. At my suggestion, Exodar became Jeddak of the firstborn. He had been a dator, or prince, until Isis had degraded him, so that his fitness for the high office bestowed was unquestioned. The peace of the Valley d'Or thus assured, the green warriors dispersed to their desolate sea bottoms, while we of Helium returned to our own country. Here again was a throne offered me, since no word had been received from the missing Jeddak of Helium, Tardos Mors, grandfather of Dejathoris, or his son Mors Kajak, Jed of Helium, her father. Over a year had elapsed since they had set out to explore the northern hemisphere in search of Carthoris, and at last their disheartened people had accepted as truth the vague rumors of their death that had filtered in from the frozen region of the pole. Once again I refused a throne, for I would not believe that the mighty Tardos Mors, or his no less redoubtable son, was dead. "Let one of their own blood rule you until they return," I said to the assembled nobles of Helium, as I addressed them from the pedestal of truth beside the throne of righteousness in the temple of reward, from the very spot where I had stood a year before when Zadaris pronounced the sentence of death upon me. As I spoke, I stepped forward and laid my hand upon the shoulder of Carthoris, where he stood in the front rank of the circle of nobles about me. As one, the nobles and the people lifted their voices in a long cheer of approbation. 10,000 swords sprang on high from as many scabbards, and the glorious fighting men of ancient Helium hailed Carthoris Getic of Helium. His tenure of office was to be for life, or until his great-grandfather or grandfather should return. Having thus satisfactorily arranged this important duty for Helium, I started the following day for the valley door, that I might remain close to the Temple of the Sun until the faithful day that should see the opening of the prison cell where my lost love lay buried. Horvastus and Cantos Can, with my other noble lieutenants, I left with Carthoris at Helium, that he might have the benefit of their wisdom, bravery, and loyalty in the performance of the arduous duties which had devolved upon him. Only Wula, my Martian hound, accompanied me. At my heels tonight the faithful beast moved softly in my tracks. As large as a Shetland pony, with hideous head and frightful fangs, he was indeed an awesome spectacle, as he crept after me on his 10 short muscular legs, but to me he was the embodiment of love and loyalty. The figure ahead was that of the black Dator of the firstborn, Thurid, whose undying enmity I had earned that time I had laid him low with my bare hands in the courtyard of the temple of Ishus, and bound him with his own harness before the noble men and women who had but a moment before been extolling his prowess. Like many of his fellows, he had apparently accepted the new order of things with good grace, and had sworn fealty to Exodar, his new ruler, but I knew that he hated me, and I was sure that in his heart he envied and hated Exodar. So I had kept a watch upon his comings and goings, to the end that of late I had become convinced that he was occupied with some manner of intrigue. Several times I had observed him leaving the walled city of the firstborn after dark, taking his way out into the cruel and horrible valley door, where no honest business could lead any man. Tonight he moved quickly along the edge of the forest until well beyond sight or sound of the city. Then he turned across the crimson sward toward the shore of the lost sea of Chorus. The rays of the nearer moon, swinging low across the valley, touched his jewel-encrusted harness with 1,000 changing lights, and glanced from the glossy ebony of his smooth hide. Twice he turned his head back toward the forest, after the manner of one who is upon an evil errand, though he must have felt quite safe from pursuit. I did not dare follow him there beneath the moonlight, since it best suited my plans not to interrupt his. I wished him to reach his destination unsuspecting, that I might learn just where the destination lay and the business that awaited the night prowler there. So it was that I remained hidden until after Thurid had disappeared over the edge of the steep bank beside the sea a quarter of a mile away. Then, with Wula following, I hastened across the open after the black Dator. The quiet of the tomb lay upon the mysterious valley of death, crouching deep in its warm nest within the sunken area at the south pole of the dying planet. In the far distance the golden cliffs raised their mighty barrier faces far into the starlit heavens, the precious metals and scintillating jewels that composed them sparkling in the brilliant light of Mars's 2 gorgeous moons. At my back was the forest, pruned and trimmed like the sword to park-like symmetry by the browsing of the ghoulish plant-men. Before me lay the lost sea of Chorus, while further on I caught the shimmering ribbon of Ish, the river of mystery, where it wound out from beneath the golden cliffs to empty into Chorus, to which for countless ages had been borne the deluded and unhappy Martians of the outer world upon the voluntary pilgrimage to this false heaven. The plant-men, with their blood-sucking hands, and the monstrous white apes that make Dor hideous by day, were hidden in their lairs for the night. There was no longer a holy Thurn upon the balcony in the golden cliffs above the Ish to summon them with weird cry to the victims floating down to their maws upon the cold, broad bosom of ancient Ish. The navies of Helium and the firstborn had cleared the fortresses and the temples of the Thurns when they had refused to surrender and accept the new order of things that had swept their false religion from long-suffering Mars. In a few isolated countries they still retained their age-old power, but Matai Shang, their Hekador, father of Thurns, had been driven from his temple. Strenuous had been our endeavors to capture him, but with a few of the faithful he had escaped, and was in hiding, where we knew not. As I came cautiously to the edge of the low cliff overlooking the lost sea of Chorus, I saw Thurid pushing out upon the bosom of the shimmering water in a small skiff, one of those strangely wrought craft of unthinkable age which the holy Thurn, with their organization of priests and lesser Thurns, were wont to distribute along the banks of the Ish, that the long journey of their victims might be facilitated. Drawn up on the beach below me were a score of similar boats, each with its long pole, at one end of which was a pike, at the other a paddle. Thurid was hugging the shore, and as he passed out of sight round a nearby promontory, I shoved one of the boats into the water, and calling Wula into it, pushed out from shore. The pursuit of Thurid carried me along the edge of the sea toward the mouth of the Ish. The further moon lay close to the horizon, casting a dense shadow beneath the cliffs that fringed the water. Thuria, the nearer moon, had set, nor would it rise again for near 4 hours, so that I was ensured concealing darkness for that length of time at least. On and on went the black warrior. Now he was opposite the mouth of Ish. Without an instant's hesitation he turned up the grim river, paddling hard against the strong current. After him came Wula and I, closer now, for the man was too intent upon forcing his craft up the river to have any eyes for what might be transpiring behind him. He hugged the shore where the current was less strong. Presently he came to the dark cavernous portal in the face of the golden cliffs through which the river poured. On into the Stygian darkness beyond he urged his craft. It seemed hopeless to attempt to follow him here where I could not see my hand before my face, and I was almost on the point of giving up the pursuit and drifting back to the mouth of the river, there to await his return, when a sudden bend showed a faint luminosity ahead. My quarry was plainly visible again, and in the increasing light from the phosphorescent rock that lay embedded in great patches in the roughly arched roof of the cavern, I had no difficulty in following him. It was my first trip upon the bosom of Ish, and the things I saw there will live forever in my memory. Terrible as they were, they could not have commenced to approximate the horrible conditions which must have obtained before Tars Tarkas, the great green warrior, Exodar, the black Dator, and I brought the light of truth to the outer world and stopped the mad rush of millions upon the voluntary pilgrimage to what they believed would end in a beautiful valley of peace and happiness and love. Even now the low islands which dotted the broad stream were choked with the skeletons and half-devoured carcasses of those who, through fear or sudden awakening to the truth, had halted almost at the completion of their journey. In the awful stench of these frightful charnel isles, haggard maniacs screamed and gibbered, and fought among the torn remnants of their grisly feasts, while in those which contained but clean-picked bones they battled with one another, the weaker furnishing sustenance for the stronger, or with claw-like hands clutched at the bloated bodies that drifted down with the current. Thurid paid not the slightest attention to the screaming things that either menaced or pleaded with him as the mood directed them. Evidently he was familiar with the horrid sights that surrounded him. He continued up the river for perhaps a mile, and then, crossing over to the left bank, drew his craft up on a low ledge that lay almost on a level with the water. I dared not follow across the stream, for he most surely would have seen me. Instead, I stopped close to the opposite wall beneath an overhanging mass of rock that cast a dense shadow beneath it. Here I could watch Thurid without danger of discovery. The black was standing upon the ledge beside his boat, looking up the river, as though he were awaiting one whom he expected from that direction. As I lay there beneath the dark rocks, I noticed that a strong current seemed to flow directly toward the center of the river, so that it was difficult to hold my craft in its position. I edged further into the shadow that I might find a hold upon the bank, but, though I proceeded several yards, I touched nothing, and then, finding that I would soon reach a point from where I could no longer see the black man, I was compelled to remain where I was, holding my position as best I could by paddling strongly against the current which flowed from beneath the rocky mass behind me. I could not imagine what might cause this strong lateral flow, for the main channel of the river was plainly visible to me from where I sat, and I could see the rippling junction of it and the mysterious current which had aroused my curiosity. While I was still speculating upon the phenomena, my attention was suddenly riveted upon Thurid, who had raised both palms forward above his head in the universal salute of Martians, and a moment later his kaor, the Barsumian word of greeting, came in low but distinct tones. I turned my eyes up the river in the direction that his were bent, and presently there came within my limited range of vision a longboat, in which were 6 men. 5 were at the paddles, while the 6th sat in the seat of honor. The white skins, the flowing yellow wigs which covered their bald pates, and the gorgeous diadems set in circlets of gold about their heads marked them as holy therns. As they drew up beside the ledge upon which Thurid awaited them, he in the bow of the boat arose to step ashore, and then I saw that it was none other than Mata Shang, father of Therns. The evident cordiality with which the two men exchanged greetings filled me with wonder, for the black and white men of Barsoom were hereditary enemies, nor ever before had I known of two meeting other than in battle. Evidently the reverses that had recently overtaken both peoples had resulted in an alliance between these two individuals, at least against the common enemy. And now I saw why Thurid had come so often out into the valley door by night, and that the nature of his conspiring might be such as to strike very close to me or to my friends. I wished that I might have found a point closer to the two men from which to have heard their conversation, but it was out of the question now to attempt to cross the river, and so I lay quietly watching them, who would have given so much to have known how close I lay to them, and how easily they might have overcome and killed me with their superior force. Several times Thurid pointed across the river in my direction, but that his gestures had any reference to me I did not for a moment believe. Presently he and Mata Shang entered the latter's boat, which turned out into the river, and swinging round, forged steadily across in my direction. As they advanced, I moved my boat farther and farther in beneath the overhanging wall, but at last it became evident that their craft was holding the same course. The 5 paddlers sent the larger boat ahead at a speed that taxed my energies to equal. Every instant I expected to feel my prow crash against solid rock. The light from the river was no longer visible, but ahead I saw the faint tinge of a distant radiance, and still the water before me was open. At last the truth dawned upon me. I was following a subterranean river which emptied into the Ish at the very point where I had hidden. The rowers were now quite close to me. The noise of their own paddles drowned the sound of mine, but in another instant the growing light ahead would reveal me to them. There was no time to be lost. Whatever action I was to take must be taken at once. Swinging the prow of my boat toward the right, I sought the river's rocky side, and there I lay while Mata Shang and Thurid approached up the center of the stream, which was much narrower than the Ish. As they came nearer, I heard the voices of Thurid and the father of Therns raised in argument. "I tell you, Thurn," the black Dator was saying, "that I wish only vengeance upon John Carter, Prince of Helium. I am leading you into no trap. What could I gain by betraying you to those who have ruined my nation and my house?" "Let us stop here a moment, that I may hear your plans," replied the Hecador, "and then we may proceed with better understanding of our duties and obligations." To the rowers he issued the command that brought their boat in toward the bank not a dozen paces beyond the spot where I lay. Had they pulled in below me, they must surely have seen me against the faint glow of the light ahead, but from where they finally came to rest, I was as secure from detection as though miles separated us. The few words I had already overheard whetted my curiosity, and I was anxious to learn what manner of vengeance Thurid was planning against me. Nor had I long to wait. I listened intently. "There are no obligations, father of Therns," continued the firstborn. "Thurid, Dator of Ishis, has no price. When the thing has been accomplished, I shall be glad if you will see to it that I am well received, as is befitting my ancient lineage and noble rank, at some court that is yet loyal to thy ancient faith, for I cannot return to the Valley Door or elsewhere within the power of the Prince of Helium. But even that I do not demand. It shall be as your own desire in the matter directs." "It shall be as you wish, Dator," replied Mata Shang. "Nor is that all. Power and riches shall be yours if you restore my daughter Feodor to me, and place within my power Deja Thoris, Princess of Helium." "Ah," he continued with a malicious snarl, "but the Earthman shall suffer from the indignities he has put upon the Holy of Holies, nor shall any vileness be too vile to inflict upon his princess. Would that it were in my power to force him to witness the humiliation and degradation of the Red Woman." "You shall have your way with her before another day has passed, Mata Shang," said Thurid, "if you but say the word." "I have heard of the Temple of the Sun, Dator," replied Mata Shang, "but never have I heard that its prisoners could be released before the allotted year of their incarceration had elapsed. How then may you accomplish the impossible?" "Access may be had to any cell of the temple at any time," replied Thurid. "Only Ishis knew this, nor was it ever Ishis's way to divulge more of her secrets than were necessary. By chance, after her death, I came upon an ancient plan of the temple, and there I found, plainly writ, the most minute directions for reaching the cells at any time. And more I learned, that many men had gone thither for Issus in the past, always on errands of death and torture to the prisoners. But those who thus learned the secret way were wont to die mysteriously immediately they had returned and made their reports to cruel Issus. "Let us proceed, then," said Ma Shang at last. "I must trust you, yet at the same time you must trust me, for we are 6 to your 1. "I do not fear," replied Thurid, "nor need you. Our hatred of the common enemy is sufficient bond to ensure our loyalty to each other, and after we have defiled the Princess of Helium there will be still greater reason for the maintenance of our allegiance, unless I greatly mistake the temper of her lord." Ma Shang spoke to the paddlers. The boat moved on up the tributary. It was with difficulty that I restrained myself from rushing upon them and slaying the 2 vile plotters. But quickly I saw the mad rashness of such an act, which would cut down the only man who could lead the way to Dejah prison before the long Martian year had swung its interminable circle. If he should lead Ma Shang to that hallowed spot, then too should he lead John Carter, Prince of Helium. With silent paddle I swung slowly into the wake of the larger craft. End of Chapter 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Warlords of Mars, written by Edgar Rice Burroughs and read by J.D. Weber on the south shores of Lake Superior. Chapter 2. Under the Mountains. As we advanced up the river which winds beneath the golden cliffs out of the bowels of the mountains of Orts, to mingle its dark waters with the grim and mysterious Ish, the faint glow which had appeared before us grew gradually into an all-enveloping radiance. The river widened until it presented the aspect of a large lake, whose vaulted dome, lighted by glowing phosphorescent rock, was splashed with the vivid rays of the diamond, the sapphire, the ruby, and the countless nameless jewels of Barsoom which lay encrusted in the virgin gold which forms the major portion of these magnificent cliffs. Beyond the lighted chamber of the lake was darkness. What lay behind the darkness I could not even guess. To have followed the Thurn boat across the gleaming water would have been to invite instant detection, and so, though I was loath to permit Thurid to pass even for an instant beyond my sight, I was forced to wait in the shadows until the other boat had passed from my sight at the far extremity of the lake. Then I paddled out upon the brilliant surface in the direction they had taken. When after what seemed an eternity I reached the shadows at the upper end of the lake, I found that the river issued from a low aperture, to pass beneath which it was necessary that I compel Woola to lay flat in the boat, and I, myself, must need bend double before the low roof cleared my head. Immediately the roof rose again upon the other side, but no longer was the way brilliantly lighted. Instead, only a feeble glow emanated from small and scattered patches of phosphorescent rock in wall and roof. Directly before me the river ran into this smaller chamber through 3 separate arched openings. Thurid and the Thurns were nowhere to be seen. Into which of the dark holes had they disappeared? There was no means by which I might know, and so I chose the center opening as being as likely to lead me in the right direction as another. Here the way was through utter darkness. The stream was narrow, so narrow that in the blackness I was constantly bumping first one rock wall, then another, as the river wound hither and thither along its flinty bed. Far ahead I presently heard a deep and sullen roar, which increased in volume as I advanced, then broke upon my ears with all the intensity of its mad fury as I swung round a sharp curve into a dimly lighted stretch of water. Directly before me the river thundered down from above in a mighty waterfall that filled the narrow gorge from side to side, rising far above me several hundred feet, as magnificent a spectacle as I had ever seen. But the roar, the awful, deafening roar of those tumbling waters penned in the rocky subterranean vault! Had the fall not entirely blocked my further passage and shown me that I had followed the wrong course, I believe that I should have fled anyway before the maddening tumult. Thurid and the Thurns could not have come this way. By stumbling upon the wrong course I had lost the trail, and they had gained so much ahead of me that now I might not be able to find them before it was too late, if in fact I could find them at all. It had taken several hours to force my way up to the falls against the strong current. and other hours would be required for the descent, although the pace would be much swifter. With a sigh I turned the prow of my craft downstream, and with mighty strokes hastened with reckless speed through the dark and tortuous channel until once again I came to the chamber into which flowed the three branches of the river. 2 unexplored channels still remained from which to choose, nor was there any means by which I could judge which was the more likely to lead me to the plotters. Never in my life, that I can recall, have I suffered such an agony of indecision. So much depended upon a correct choice, so much depended upon haste. The hours that I had already lost might seal the fate of the incomparable Dejathours, were she not already dead. To sacrifice other hours, and maybe days, in a fruitless exploration of another blind lead would unquestionably prove fatal. Several times I essayed the right-hand entrance only to turn back as though warned by some strange intuitive sense that this was not the way. At last, convinced by the oft-recurring phenomenon, I cast my all upon the left-hand archway, yet it was with a lingering doubt that I turned a parting look at the sullen waters which rolled, dark and forbidding, from beneath the grim, low archway on the right. And as I looked, there came bobbing out upon the current, from the Stygian darkness of the interior, the shell of one of the great, succulent fruits of the Saporus tree. I could scarce restrain a shout of elation as this silent, insensate messenger floated past me, on toward the Ish and Chorus, for it told me that journeying Martians were above me on that very stream. They had eaten of this marvelous fruit which nature concentrates within the hard shell of the Saporus nut, and having eaten had cast the husk overboard. It could have come from no others than the party I sought. Quickly I abandoned all thought of the left-hand passage, and a moment later had turned into the right. The stream soon widened, and reoccurring areas of phosphorescent rock lighted my way. I made good time, but was convinced that I was nearly a day behind those I was tracking. Neither Wula nor I had eaten since the previous day, but in so far as he was concerned it mattered but little, since practically all the animals of the Dead Sea bottoms of Mars are able to go for incredible periods without nourishment. Nor did I suffer. The water of the river was sweet and cold, for it was unpolluted by decaying bodies, like the Ish. And as for food, why, the mere thought that I was nearing my beloved princess raised me above every material want. As I proceeded, the river became narrower, and the current swift and turbulent, so swift, in fact, that it was with difficulty that I forced my craft upward at all. I could not have been making to exceed 100 yards an hour, when at a bend I was confronted by a series of rapids through which the river foamed and boiled at a terrific rate. My heart sank within me. The Saporus nutshell had proved a false prophet, and, after all, my intuition had been correct. It was the left-hand channel that I should have followed. Had I been a woman, I should have wept. At my right was a great, slow-moving eddy that circled far beneath the cliff's overhanging side, and to rest my tired muscles before turning back, I let my boat drift into its embrace. I was almost prostrated by disappointment. It would mean another half-day's loss of time to retrace my way and take the only passage that yet remained unexplored. What hellish fate had led me to select from 3 possible avenues the 2 that were wrong? As the lazy current of the eddy carried me slowly about the periphery of the watery circle, my boat twice touched the rocky side of the river in the dark recess beneath the cliff. A third time it struck, gently as it had before, but the contact resulted in a different sound, the sound of wood scraping upon wood. In an instant I was on the alert, for there could be no wood within that buried river that had not been man-brought. Almost coincidentally with my first apprehension of the noise, my hand shot out across the boat's side, and a second later I felt my fingers gripping the gunwale of another craft. As though turned to stone, I sat in tense and rigid silence, straining my eyes into the utter darkness before me in an effort to discover if the boat were occupied. It was entirely possible that there might be men on board it, who were still ignorant of my presence, for the boat was scraping gently against the rocks upon one side, so that the gentle touch of my boat upon the other easily could have gone unnoticed. Peer as I would, I could not penetrate the darkness, and then I listened intently for the sound of breathing near me, but except for the noise of the rapids, the soft scraping of the boats, and the lapping of the water at their sides, I could distinguish no sound. As usual, I thought rapidly. A rope lay coiled in the bottom of my own craft. Very softly I gathered it up, and making one end fast to the bronze ring in the prow, I stepped gingerly into the boat beside me. In one hand I grasped the rope, in the other my keen longsword. For a full minute, perhaps, I stood motionless after entering the strange craft. It had rocked a trifle beneath my weight, but it had been the scraping of its sides against the side of my own boat that had seemed most likely to alarm its occupants, if there were any. But there was no answering sound, and a moment later I had felt from stem to stern and found the boat deserted. Groping with my hands along the face of the rocks to which the craft was moored, I discovered a narrow ledge which I knew must be the avenue taken by those who had come before me. That they could be none other than Thurid and his party I was convinced by the size and build of the boat I had found. Calling to Wula to follow me, I stepped out upon the ledge. The great savage brute, agile as a cat, crept after me. As he passed through the boat that had been occupied by Thurid and the Therns, he emitted a single low growl, and when he came beside me upon the ledge and my hand rested upon his neck, I felt his short mane bristling with anger. I think he sensed telepathically the recent presence of an enemy, for I had made no effort to impart to him the nature of our quest or the status of those we tracked. This omission I now made haste to correct, and, after the manner of green Martians with their beast, I let him know partially by the weird and uncanny telepathy of Barsoom and partly by word of mouth that we were upon the trail of those who had recently occupied the boat through which we had just passed. A soft purr, like that of a great cat, indicated that Wula understood, and then, with a word to him to follow, I turned to the right along the ledge. But scarcely had I done so than I felt his mighty fangs tugging at my leathern harness. As I turned to discover the cause of his act, he continued to pull me steadily in the opposite direction, nor would he desist until I had turned about and indicated that I would follow him voluntarily. Never had I known him to be an heir in a matter of tracking, so it was with a feeling of entire security that I moved cautiously in the huge beast's wake. Through Cimmerian darkness he moved along the narrow ledge beside the boiling rapids. As we advanced, the way led from beneath the overhanging cliffs out into a dim light, and then it was that I saw that the trail had been cut from the living rock, and then it ran up along the river's side beyond the rapids. For hours we followed the dark and gloomy river farther and farther into the bowels of Mars. From the direction and distance I knew that we must be well beneath the valley door, and possibly beneath the Sea of Omin as well. It could not be much farther now to the Temple of the Sun. Even as my mind framed the thought, Wula halted suddenly before a narrow, arched doorway in the cliff by the trail's side. Quickly he crouched back away from the entrance, at the same time turning his eyes toward me. Words could not have more plainly told me that danger of some sort lay nearby, and so I pressed quietly forward to his side, and passing him looked into the aperture at our right. Before me was a fair-sized chamber that, from its appointments, I knew must have at one time been a guard-room. There were racks for weapons, and slightly raised platforms for the sleeping silks and furs of the warriors. But now its only occupants were two of the Therns who had been of the party with Thurid and Mata Shang. The men were in earnest conversation, and from their tones it was apparent that they were entirely unaware that they had listeners. "I tell you," one of them was saying, "I do not trust the Black One. There was no necessity for leaving us here to guard the way." "Against what, pray, should we guard this long-forgotten abysmal path? It was but a ruse to divide our numbers. He will have Mata Shang leave others elsewhere on some pretext or other, and then at last he will fall upon us with his confederates and slay us all." "I believe you, Lakor," replied the other. "There can never be aught else than deadly hatred between Thurn and Firstborn. And what think you of the ridiculous matter of the light? Let the light shine with the intensity of 3 radium units for 50 tals, and for 1 axe let it shine with the intensity of 1 radium unit, and then for 25 tals with 9 units. Those were his very words, and to think that wise old Mata Shang should listen to such foolishness." "Indeed it is silly," replied Lakor. "It will open nothing other than the way to a quick death for us all." He had to make some answer when Mata Shang asked him flatly what he should do when he came to the Temple of the Sun, and so he made his answer quickly from his imagination. I would wager a Hecator's diadem that he could not now repeat it himself. "Let us not remain here longer, Lakor," spoke the other Thurn. "Perchance if we hasten after them we may come in time to rescue Mata Shang, and wreak our own vengeance upon the Black Dator. What say you?" "Never in a long life," answered Lecor, "have I disobeyed a single command of the Father of Therns. I shall stay here until I rot if he does not return to bid me elsewhere." Lecor's companion shook his head. "You are my superior," he said. "I cannot do other than you sanction, though I still believe that we are foolish to remain." I, too, thought that they were foolish to remain, for I saw from Woola's actions that the trail led through the room where the two Therns held guard. I had no reason to harbor any considerable love for this race of self-deified demons, yet I would have passed them by, were it possible, without molesting them. It was worth trying anyway, for a fight might delay us considerably, or even put an end entirely to my search. Better men than I have gone down before fighters of meaner ability than that possessed by the fierce Thern warriors. Signaling Woola to heel, I stepped suddenly into the room before the two men. At sight of me their longswords flashed from the harness at their sides, but I raised my hand in a gesture of restraint. "I seek Thurid, the Black Dator," I said. "My quarrel's with him, not with you. Let me pass then in peace, for if I mistake not, he is as much your enemy as mine, and you can have no cause to protect him." They lowered their swords, and Lecor spoke. "I know not whom you may be, with the white skin of a Thern and the black hair of a red man. But were it only Thurid whose safety were at stake, you might pass, and welcome in so far as we be concerned. Tell us who you be, and what mission calls you to this unknown world beneath the valley door. Then maybe we can see our way to let you pass upon the errand which we should like to undertake would our orders permit." I was surprised that neither of them had recognized me, for I thought that I was quite sufficiently well known either by personal experience or reputation to every Thern upon Barsoom, as to make my identity immediately apparent to any part of the planet. In fact, I was the only white man upon Mars whose hair was black and whose eyes were gray, with the exception of my son Carthoris. To reveal my identity might be to precipitate an attack, for every Thern upon Barsoom knew that to me they owed the fall of their age-old spiritual supremacy. On the other hand, my reputation as a fighting man might be sufficient to pass me by these two, were their livers not of the right complexion to welcome a battle to the death. To be quite candid, I did not attempt to delude myself with any such sophistry, since I knew well that upon warlike Mars there are few cowards, and that every man, whether prince, priest, or peasant, glories in deadly strife. And so I gripped my longsword the tighter as I replied to Lecor. "I believe that you will see the wisdom of permitting me to pass unmolested," I said, "for it would avail you nothing to die uselessly in the rocky bowels of Barsoom, merely to protect a hereditary enemy such as Thurid, Dator of the Firstborn. That you shall die should you elect to oppose me is evidenced by the mouldering corpses of all the many great Barsoomian warriors who have gone down beneath this blade. I am John Carter, Prince of Helium." For a moment that name seemed to paralyze the two men, but only for a moment, and then the younger of them, with a vile name upon his lips, rushed toward me with ready sword. He had been standing a little behind his companion, Lecor, during our parley, and now, ere he could engage me, the older man grasped his harness and drew him back. "Hold," commanded Lecor. "There will be plenty of time to fight if we find it wise to fight at all. There be good reasons why every Thern upon Barsoom should yearn to spill the blood of the blasphemer, the sacrilegious, but let us mix wisdom with our righteous hate. The Prince of Helium is bound upon an errand which we ourselves, but a moment since, were wishing that we might undertake. Let him go then and slay the black. When he returns we shall still be here to bar his way to the outer world, and thus we shall have rid of ourselves of two enemies, nor have incurred the displeasure of the Father of Therns." As he spoke, I could not but note the crafty glint in his evil eyes, and while I saw the apparent logic of his reasoning, I felt subconsciously, perhaps, that his words did but veil some sinister intent. The other Thern turned toward him in evident surprise, but when Lecor had whispered a few brief words into his ear, he too drew back, and nodded acquiescence to his superior's suggestion. "Proceed, John Carter," said Lecor. "But know that if Thurid does not lay you low, there will be those awaiting your return who will see that you never pass again into the sunlight of the upper world. Go." During our conversation, Woola had been growling and bristling close to my side. Occasionally he would look up into my face with a low pleading whine, as though begging for the word that would send him headlong at the bare throats before him. He too sensed the villainy behind the smooth words. Beyond the Thurn several doorways opened off the guard-room, and toward the one upon the extreme right Lakor motioned. "That way leads to Thurid," he said. But when I would have called Woola to follow me there, the beast whined and held back, and at last ran quickly to the first opening at the left, where he stood emitting his coughing bark, as though urging me to follow him upon the right way. I turned a questioning look upon Lakor. "The brute is seldom wrong," I said, "and while I do not doubt your superior knowledge, Thurn, I think that I shall do well to listen to the voice of instinct that is backed by love and loyalty." As I spoke, I smiled grimly that he might know without words that I distrusted him. "As you will," the fellow replied with a shrug. "In the end it shall be all the same." I turned and followed Woola into the left-hand passage, and though my back was toward my enemies, my ears were on the alert. Yet I heard no sound of pursuit. The passageway was dimly lighted by occasional radium bulbs, the universal lighting medium of Barsoom. These same lamps may have been doing continuous duty in these subterranean chambers for ages, since they require no attention and are so compounded that they give off but the minutest of their substance in the generation of years of luminosity. We had proceeded for but a short distance when we commenced to pass the mouths of diverging corridors, but not once did Woola hesitate. It was at the opening to one of these corridors upon my right that I presently heard a sound that spoke more plainly to John Carter, fighting men, than could the words of my mother tongue. It was the clank of metal, the metal of a warrior's harness, and it came from a little distance up the corridor upon my right. Woola heard it too, and like a flash he had wheeled and stood facing the threatening danger, his mane all bristle, and all his rows of glistening fangs bared by snarling, back-drawn lips. With a gesture I silenced him, and together we drew aside into another corridor a few paces further on. Here we waited, nor did we have long to wait, for presently we saw the shadows of two men fall upon the floor of the main corridor athwart the doorway of our hiding-place. Very cautiously they were moving now. The accidental clank that had alarmed me was not repeated. Presently they came opposite our station, nor was I surprised to see that the two were Lakor and his companion of the guard-room. They walked very softly, and in the right hand of each gleamed a keen longsword. They halted quite close to the entrance of our retreat, whispering to each other. "Can it be that we have distanced them already?" said Lakor. "Either that or the beast has led the man upon a wrong trail," replied the other, "for the way which we took is by far the shorter to this point. For him who knows it, John Carter would have found it a short road to death had he taken it as you suggested to him." "Yes," said Lakor. "No amount of fighting ability would have saved him from the pivoted flagstone. He surely would have stepped upon it, and by now, if the pit beneath it has a bottom, which Thurid denies, he should have been rapidly approaching it. Curses on that Kalot of his that warned him toward the safer avenue." "There be other dangers ahead of him, though," spoke Lakor's fellow, "which he may not so easily escape, should he succeed in escaping our two good swords. Consider, for example, what chance he will have, coming unexpectedly into the chamber of—" I would have given much to have heard the balance of that conversation, that I might have been warned of the perils that lay ahead, but fate intervened, and just at the very instant of all other instances that I would not have elected to do it, I sneezed. End of chapter 2.